we're live here. We're just coming on. We're getting our social media channels coming on. And once we get them set up, I'll introduce myself and then I'll introduce Betsy. But for now, I'm just looking at the streams coming on, and it looks like our YouTube is on. Our Periscope is coming on, and our Facebook to Dry Tear page is on. And let's just make sure that our Helping Parents of Mentally Ill Children is on. Okay, so just want to wait a few seconds for these to come online, and people will be notified that we're starting live now. Give it a few more seconds to kick in, and then I'm going to introduce myself. Okay, so we'll start. So, hi everybody. My name's Bill McPhee, and welcome to Helping Parents of Mentally Ill Children. I'm coming from you today from Fort Erie, Ontario, which is not too far from Niagara Falls, Ontario, Canada. And I'm actually right at the mouth of the river. I'm at the mouth of Lake Erie and the Niagara River, and Lake Erie flows into the Niagara River, which goes down 20 miles and goes over to Niagara Falls. It's 20 miles away down the river. And I'm right across from Buffalo, New York. I can see the skyline of Buffalo, New York right now, all the lights, and it's a beautiful night out there. So again, my name's Bill McPhee, and welcome to our Facebook group again. And this is my book. I'm the publisher, and I'm the author of To Cry a Dry Tear, Bill McPhee's Journey of Hope and Recovery with Schizophrenia. And you can always find more about that at my website at billmcphee.ca. And McPhee is MACPHEE. I was actually hospitalized 6 different times. I lived in 3 different group homes. I had a suicide attempt, and I spent 5 years on the couch doing nothing, dealing with a deep, deep, dark depression. However, today I wouldn't want to be anybody else other than who I am today. So welcome everybody, and I'm going to introduce Betsy. So Betsy Ross is a fairly new author who has dedicated in a short book series that promotes mental health for veterans awareness. And she's developed a series called the Fight series. The series is fiction, but it is written in a way to grasp the emotional and mental processes of how some veterans transition out of the military. Aside from writing, she is a U.S. Army veteran, a mother of 2 children, a wife, a rancher, and a personal trainer. So Betsy, thank you very much for coming on tonight live, for doing that. Betsy, you're out of Texas, you mentioned. And before we get started, I just want to ask you, and I'm sure everybody is curious to know, is Betsy Ross your real name?
Unfortunately, is not. I really wish it was.
Yeah, that's great. That's your pen name, but that's great. It's very creative and interesting.
Yes. Yes. I figured it was more fitting for the Fight series and what it was set out to do.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I mean, I'm from Canada, and I even know Betsy Ross is famous in the U.S. I know that. So, Betsy, let's talk a little bit about. You mentioned start off you're in the U.S. Army. Tell us how you joined the Army. What happened? Give me a little bit of information on that.
Well, I was actually working on my associate's degree in geology at the time that I decided I wanted to do a little more, something more. I was an Air Force brat, long family history of being in the Air Force. Of course, I was the rebel and I went Army. I'm the only Army person in my family. But it definitely took my life on a different path that I would never have expected. I was only in for a couple of years before I was injured. I did not get to deploy like I had wanted to, but I did meet a lot of very interesting people. I got to see the good and bad. I got to see as far as how the military life affected people. And then transitioning out is really when I really picked up that more of the dark side of life and how people are treated, even amongst ourselves as human beings.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I figured out, even though I didn't get to deploy, I didn't get to serve very long in the military and serve my country like I really wanted to. I figured, you know what, everything happens for a reason. I can actually do something about this.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just kept pushing.
I can't help but remember. I can remember being very, as a child on television, there'd be certain ads, and it would be ads for the U.S. Army, and they'd be an ad, and it'd say basically that they'd show a bunch of stuff that people were doing, and they'd say, well, we do more things than before 6 a.m. before than most people do in a day, kind of thing, right? And so, what I wanted to start off with, just be interested in, what was your daily routine like? What did you do every day? Was every day the same? Was there a huge variety? And so, tell us what a day in the life would be for you.
Being at like a duty station or like basic
Well, I
training.
guess is there how long is basic training? So tell us a little bit about basic training, and then after basic training, what were you doing?
Okay. Basic training is pretty much the same for anyone, regardless of what their MOS is. It's a pretty intense, but it's at least at the time it was 10 weeks. I'm assuming it's still 10 weeks. Um, it's typically you'll wake up maybe around 3 or 4 in the morning, and with drill sergeants just yelling at you for no reason, and um, basically you would just do different various types of training, whether it's with weapons, whether it's just being picked on for various things, but you're learning all sorts of things just to be a typical soldier. And then after that, you would go to your schooling, whatever your job is. I was an ammunition specialist, so I went to ammo specialist school.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, I ended up at Fort Bliss in El Paso, Texas, which was a very ironic to join the military and you leave Texas because I was born and raised in Texas, but I ended up back in Texas. Granted, El Paso is the opposite side, and
Oh, wow.
Texas is huge, but it was still funny. Um,
It sounds
but
like
as far as when you're,
was it very stressful in basic training? I imagine it would be very stressful, was it?
oh, absolutely.
Uh,
They didn't, at least we weren't, at the time when I was in, I wasn't allowed to have coffee, any type of junk food. I wasn't. So, of course, you couldn't have cigarettes either, but I wasn't a smoker.
uh,
Um, I wasn't even a drinker at the time, so it wasn't that much of a difficult. The no coffee thing really got me, especially when you're being woken up at all times of the night.
wow, wow.
Um,
Now,
so yes, it's
now,
pretty
now, was
intense.
it mixed with women and men, or were you in a was it all women and then separated all men, or how or was it mixed?
It was mixed. It was
Okay,
co-ed.
okay. And then now tell us then after you finished basic training, then you said you're in the ammunition area.
I had gone to AIT for my ammo tech specialist training. Um, I did that. I can't even remember how long that training was, but it was brutal for me just because it was closer to winter time at that
Hmm.
time, and you have to go to the field and all that. So that was no fun. But the schooling part itself was like almost a typical day. I
Hmm.
mean, you had the military aspect of it, but you were still basically going to school.
Okay.
You still had the PT, you still had all that.
Uh, did you see a lot of people
But
drop out? A lot of your peers drop out in that, or?
in schooling, the school part, yes. They try not to kick people out in basic so much. Of course, I say that, but every unit's different. But the schooling part, there were some who had to drop out or change jobs because they just couldn't do it.
Right. Wow. Very good. Okay, so Betsy, let's talk a little bit about now. You're a writer, and you've created a series called the Flight Series or the Fight Series, and I believe that you have Fight One and Fight Two out, and I know through social media that you're working on a Fight number three. Is that correct? Tell us a little bit about the series and about the book and about the book.
Okay, the fight series truthfully was not even meant to be a series. It was supposed to just be fight, and that was the end of it. Um, but the series itself, it's I would consider uniquely written in the sense that it's written more from that character's emotional and mental side of how they come home after being deployed or uh, trying to go back to school or find a job all over again. It's just the main focus is what it's how it's affecting certain characters. Some people don't like so much the jumping around part, but I wanted it to be personal. I wanted it to get different veterans' perspectives of how transition is because everyone has a story.
Hmm.
The military affects people differently, coming home affects people differently. Some people have no problem transitioning, but for a lot of us, to some degree, it has a pretty kind of like a shell shock moment,
Hmm.
especially when you're trying to explain, you know, that structure life you had, and all of a
Hmm.
sudden you don't have it. It's hard to find words. It's hard to find ways to say, I know you're my family, or I know you from before I joined the military, but now things are different. I feel different. It's just very hard to form that without feeling like you've gone crazy or
Hmm.
just something. So I really wanted to find just a more or less simpler communication type story that can actually even help veterans, but help with families too to
Hmm.
understand their family, their fellow veteran, and go, okay, you have your own story, but is this how you're feeling? Because I read a book that kind of correlated these certain emotions. Are you thinking these same things?
Hmm.
Because I lost a lot of battle buddies even when I got home. I lost a lot of battle buddies to suicide.
Hmm.
And with all these 22 plus veterans committing suicide, there is a reason for it. And of course, there's numerous variables why.
Hmm.
But, you know, if people really understand the depths of that mental health and how deep all these military experiences affect us on a very deep level, it affects everything in our daily lives, going to our grocery stores, just being in a crowd, just simply having a conversation with another human being. It affects everything on every level.
Yeah.
And so I really wanted to really pinpoint that to individuals, whether they're veterans or not,
Hmm.
just how deep these experiences or these flashbacks are for a lot of our
Hmm.
veterans.
And I know you mentioned it, and we all know that there is a lot of suicide through veterans and through families. And I imagine a big problem too if it doesn't go to the extreme of suicide. But I'm sure that the relationship between the husband and the wife is very changed when veterans come home and are trying to be fit into the mainstream family life. I'm sure there's many challenges, right?
Absolutely. And especially with marriages, even if that couple was already together while they were in the service experiencing that type of lifestyle, even when you come home and all of a sudden that structured life just stops, and it changes everything, and then of course that just builds upon the stress levels and everything else. But again, everyone does have their own story.
Hmm. Yeah, and we hear about the post traumatic stress disorder. Is that the most common thing that goes on? Are there other subcategories or other difficulties rather than just post traumatic stress disorder? Is there a variety of, or is it all lumped into that one category?
I would probably say stereotypically it does get more collectively just said PTSD or TBI. um, but for most people, whether they've even deployed or not, because not every soldier or marine deploys, just that military experience, um, it's I'd say it really changes how the brain works. I don't know all the scientific terms for it, but that's when you get your depression and the anxiety. And some people have developed even bipolar and other related type illnesses, if you will. Uh, but again, all of those affect how you see life, how you see yourself. How do you figure out you're going to do that next step? Whether are you going to find a job? You mean you're going to have to find somewhere to live. I mean, if you have
Hmm.
a family, you're
Hmm.
going to have to take those next steps. So those little things all affect how one continues the fight.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's very simple. 'Cause even those that have families, they do commit suicide. There are
Mm-hmm.
no limitations. There are no racial discriminations when it comes to depression and
Mm-hmm.
PTSD or suicidal tendencies.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's just a little bit of everything. But stereotypically, PTSD is just more well known
Right.
in describing it.
Right. Now, for your books, the research do you do? Obvious, there's personal stuff that you've gone through, but how do you go find your research? Do you have you interviewed many people and that, or where do you get the research for your books?
Uh, some of the stories did come from interviews. Again, like I said, I did not deploy, but I did
Mm-hmm.
have some people that I knew that were willing to at least share how they felt about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried to, because I feel that I'm pretty open-minded in how I think and I'm pretty understanding, that I really try to place myself in their shoes because I have to write from that perspective. Um, I know I've had a lot of backlash because of that, because I will never understand, and I have nothing but respect for people who do serve their country and do what they have to do. But to really talk about something that many people don't want to talk about,
Mm-hmm.
I I I think me being a poet for so long, it really has helped me find words to really hit home for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
I think that has helped me being able to create this fiction series because it is fiction, but it is based on pretty real, intense emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really hoping it is able to help even veterans who can't talk about certain things. It will help them realize, you know what, they're not alone.
Right. Now, what about the degree of mental illness or the degree of
Mm.
trauma? Like you mentioned that people get deployed several times sometimes, right? So if somebody, like say example, were deployed four different places over a 20-year period and had like how does it determine how you get deployed? And do people who have longer deployments in different places suffer greater than somebody who had a lesser deployment, or is it all over the place?
I would say it's all over the place because it depends on each individual. Um, I don't think it's not a set anything. Unfortunately, it's I think it's just how the dice fall. It's
Mm-hmm.
really not anything one specific. Anything depends on your unit, depends on what you're doing, depends on um, extra training or extra schooling you're trying to do. Whether you're trying to go to I don't know uh, to be a scout, to be airborne.
Mm-hmm.
It just depends on the different things you're wanting to do. So it really depends on how the cards fall of where you end up going or how many times you
Right.
deploy. Some people do deploy more than others and some don't deploy ever,
Mm-hmm.
even in 10, 20 years. So
And is
I
it, and
think
is
that's
that
just
is that is
fight.
that done on a volunteer basis? Like when you come back, if people basically you just go where you're told, or is it like a volunteer kind of thing?
Most of the time I would probably say it's voluntold
Okay.
as it's usually said in the military.
Yeah.
It's very rarely volunteer. Yes, it does happen. Yes, a lot of people do get to volunteer, simply volunteer and say yes, I'll go.
Mm-hmm.
But again, if they need the numbers right away, sometimes they don't get those volunteers, so they basically force someone to go.
Right. And now are things getting better or worse? Like now we see that there's more help according in the media, at least from when I pick up through the U.S. That the veterans are being taken care of a little bit better than maybe in the past, or there's helps. Are things turning around, or it's a fight, like you say in your book titled "Fight." It's a fight.
Unfortunately, that would depend on who you ask,
Uh,
because everyone has their own personal experiences with, say, the VA.
right.
Um, and from what I have seen, from what I have heard, I'd say things haven't got a whole lot better now compared to like World War II or,
Mm-hmm.
Vietnam. But then, yes, of course, things have kind of gotten a bit better.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as these last, oh gosh, what is it, 20 years now? I'd probably say not so much because you're still getting suicides. There's more than
Mm-hmm.
22 committing suicide.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, you still had all these suicides occurring outside of VA hospitals. Um, But of course, there are good stories that say that the VA helped them all the way through.
Hmm.
They are the greatest. So it just depends on the individual's
Hmm.
experience. There are a lot of variables that come with it. I mean, some things are just harder to prove because there is stolen valor. There are people who do try to manipulate the system, even though they did deploy and probably deserve it.
Hmm.
It's a very hard word to say in the veteran community, but at the same time, there are a lot of veterans that need help. And I honestly think we just don't have the resources.
Hmm.
That's why you do have these more programs, you have these more community type
Hmm.
groups coming together and really hopefully trying to help those that fall through the cracks.
Right.
But that's also why in the fight series, you'll see also on social media that I'll post that says Veterans Unite, because I honestly believe that who knows a vet better than a vet? We have to help our own. We did it in the military. We looked out for our own, regardless of gender, age, rank. It didn't matter. We looked out for our own. They were left and right of us at all times. So, you know, we know what it's like. We know what transition's like. We know how we get treated among society and how
Hmm.
VA isn't as reliable as it should
Hmm.
be. So, really, veterans ought to unite and help one
In,
another.
in in young veterans, how do parents play a role? Do they play a role at all? I mean, this is, helping parents of mentally ill children. Is there any
Hmm.
communication, and do you see people who are mentally ill at the beginning in say basic training, and how what can parents do if they have somebody in the military, and kind of keep an eye on them? Are parents shut out, or because we see so many times that after veterans come home, they may become homeless after a while and that, but you know what, it's the last thing that a parent wants to see. How do you have any advice or help for parents out there?
Honestly, to keep reaching out, to keep checking on them, because a lot of times, unfortunately, as you'll see as some of the symptoms of depression and suicidal tendencies, everyone gets shut out. There is no communication. There is no asking for help, even though that's what they need. Simply, well, there's really no simply about it, but really it's just checking on them because communication is key. But when you fall into that dark state of depression or you feeling unworthy because you've taken off the uniform, you feel like you're just beneath everybody now,
Hmm.
or no one listens, no one believes you, or anything like that. You just start shutting down and you cut off all ties. Even your own family feel, like they're not your true family. Yeah, you're related, but the military was your family. And so when you come home, it's like y'all are strangers. Y'all don't know me. Y'all
Hmm.
keep treating me the way you did before, but now, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, you don't know me, therefore you're a stranger. Yes, you're my mom. Yes, you're my dad, or whatever, but you don't know me, so you're a stranger now, and they just cut ties altogether.
Oh. Hmm.
And and so it's a pretty dark, devastating moment. I know from a parent's perspective, it's very heartbreaking, but unfortunately, if you are willing to um, take some of that weight from them, then you're going to have to keep trying because they will probably do extreme things, um, whether just feel like they don't deserve anything and they just end up on the street trying to survive that way, or trying to commit suicide.
What are some of the early symptoms that say? I imagine that a lot of people who are brought back out and who are discharged or out of the military, and they go home to live with their parents probably for a while or something like that. What are some of the early signs, or what are some things they could kind of look for? Or you mentioned about the communication, you're loyal, my family is now in the army, these are my family, and you're kind of aliens, kind of, you don't know what I've gone through.
Yeah.
What are some of the signs? What can people look for?
Um, I guess I'm trying to think of from like the very, I'd probably say it's just the distancing because they don't know how to communicate. They'll say certain jargon or lingo, and you just look at them like, what? Or if they try to even they may not go full into their own stories, whether they're deployment stories or anything that happened in the military. They may not be able to say it fully, but if they try to open up even a little bit to see how you'd react, don't go like, "Oh my God." Don't try not to overreact, because that will make them feel like, okay, I am crazy and they don't know me, and then that's how they become feeling like they're strangers. So I think it's a communication thing, and just keep open minded. Um, Even if they've had to do the very things that no one likes to talk about while they were doing their job, then that is all the more reason, like, you know what? I know what you had to do. I understand it. We do not hate you for it. I mean, it can get very emotional on both ends, and especially for certain individuals, they don't handle emotion well.
Right.
And so if you just try not to overdo it when you're trying to be supportive,
Mhm.
because it just depends on the individual, of course. But definitely just trying to be open minded and supportive in their way for
Yeah.
them.
So your books fight are who are they written for? Are they written for the people who have served in the military? Is it for their relatives, or is it for the general public outside of the military? Who is fight written for?
Primarily, bottom line, veterans.
Veterans. Okay.
I do keep a lot of the jargon and some of the scenarios, some of the inside jokes, if you will, amongst branches or within the Army. It's more picked up from fellow Army veterans. However, Marines and other branches can kind of pick up on some of it too, of course. Um, but again, Fight wasn't meant to be a series, so Fight was kind of distinctly written for veterans. And then it wasn't until I got some of the reactions that I did that I realized, you know what? Families need to hear this too.
Mhm.
And so that's when I started writing Fight 2 and then Fight 3. And then right now, it's just going to be a 4-book series. But I try to pinpoint the stereotypes, the stigmas within the veteran community, like PTSD, or how transitioning out of the military can affect relationships, and then homelessness. And then Fight 3 picks up on drug addictions. And then Fight 4, hoping I can find more stories from veterans that are paramedics, police officers,
Yes.
and those
The
type of
first
fields.
responders. Yeah. First responders.
First
Yeah.
primes, there you
Yeah.
go.
So, so Betsy, before we give the audience contact information, where to find Fight and how to learn more about you through social media and that, is there anything else you'd like to say about Fight, your books, before we give people information on how they can find it?
Well, see, fight the fight series, the main mission is to have fellow vets to really keep fighting the fight. And then the families, it's to really try to be supportive and be open minded for their veterans, because the military as a whole affects everything in our daily lives and our families and relationships and everything in between. So, even though we take off the uniform, life does not stop. The fight does not stop. There's always fighting within us and around us, it feels like. So, you know what? You're not alone. We
Right.
are all fighting, and we can all fight together.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing,
Thank
Betsy,
you.
and having coming on our helping parents of mentally ill children program. How can people find the book or get a hold of you if they would like to talk to you and learn more? Can you give us your contacts?
Absolutely. Let's see. Right now, as far as social media, I'm probably more easily able to be reached out to on Twitter, Ross_fight. But I also am on Instagram. I do have a website, but it's a little lengthy, so I probably wouldn't be able to say all that. But Instagram is Ross_vets. Um, right now, Fight 1 and Fight 2 are available on Amazon and paperback and Kindle. Fight is also available on audio. Fight 3 is complete. It just needs to be published, and it will be published on paperback and Kindle hopefully here in the next couple months on Amazon.
Very good. Well, Betsy, thank you very much for coming on here, and thank you for your
Thank you.
time in the service to protect your country and serving. I know the Canada here, we're a great friends of the United States, and states are friends of Canadians, and we'll give an A here, A, and thank you for coming on, Betsy, and we'll, all the best to you, and keep on writing, and again, keep on fighting.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having
You're
me.
welcome. Bye for now.
Yes, sir. Bye bye.